What's up guys, welcome back, and in this video I'd like to use Laravel Passport for authentication in our application. Let's allow for our users to be able to log in and access their own to-dos. Now if you're used to building server-side apps in Laravel like I am, you've probably made use of the auth scaffolding that's available. So you've probably done something like PHP artisan make auth, and that would scaffold out your routes, your controllers, your views, and you just have to make a few customizations and you're off to the races. However, if you're building a single page app, we have to make use of token-based authentication, or JWTs. It's quite a bit more work on both the front end and the back end, but that's just one of the trade-offs you have to make when building an SPA. So we'll split this up over the next few videos. We'll start with the back end in this one. We'll be using Laravel Passport, which has a ton of features related to a full OAuth 2 implementation, but we're just going to make use of the password grant token, which allows us to log in using a username and a password. If for whatever reason you don't want to use Passport, you can also use this package, which just does JSON web tokens, does it really well, and this was probably the standard before Passport came out, and it's a good alternative. But yeah, like I said, we'll be using Passport. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Let's composer require it. Okay, that's done. What's next? Next, we have to migrate our database. So PHP artisan migrate, and it added all of the tables that Passport needs. What's next? PHP artisan passport install. Let's do that. And you can see it made two clients, a personal access one, which we won't be using. We'll be using this one, the password grant client. So we need this information later on. Okay, what's next? We have to add this has API tokens in our user model. So let's go ahead and go to our code, go into our user model, and let's add that has API tokens and make sure to import it. Cool. What's next? Next, you should call passport routes from within the boot method of your auth service provider. So let's go ahead and do that. So auth service provider, so boot down here, you should do passport routes. I didn't copy it. Okay, passport routes. But since we're only using the password grant option, we can pass in a closure here. So the only routes that are generated are the ones we need for that password grant. So if I do this, just do router for access tokens, that should generate only the routes we need, and make sure I spell function right. Function. Okay. What's next? And we have to change the API driver to passport in our config auth. Okay. Config auth. Change this to passport. Okay. Okay, so if I take a look at our routes using PHP artisan route list, sorry, I forgot to import that. We have to import passport here. Okay, let's try it again. So route list, okay, there we go. The endpoint that we're interested in and the endpoint that we use to log in is this one right here. So we have to post to OAuth token with our username and our password. And if it's correct, it's going to return a token to us. And the idea is we store that token on our end and make subsequent requests with that token. So let's go ahead and use a REST client to test out our endpoints in Passport. So I'm going to use this app called Insomnia, which is just a REST client. You're probably used to using something like Postman, which is the most common one that people use out there. But I recently started using this because I feel like the UI of Postman is a bit too cluttered and kind of confusing sometimes, whereas this one is very nice and intuitive, and it has a nice dark theme and just works really well. So I'm going to stick with this one. And as you can see, I have the APIs from our Laravel app here, and here's the response. And you can easily make requests here, put stuff in the body, headers, and I really like it. So I'm going to make a new folder here. Let's call it To-Dos Auth API. And let's start with login. Okay. This should be a post request. And the URL is todo.laravel.test/ was it OAuth token. And let's see if we get anything. Sorry, typo. Try it again. Okay. So we're getting a response here, which looks like the correct response because we did not pass it any information. So right now I don't have any users in my database. I just migrated the database and we haven't been using users. Here's all the new tables from Passport, but we haven't made use of users yet because it's just a bunch of to-dos that we have. So let's go ahead and quickly make a user here. I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to do factory app user create. I believe that's right. Okay. Actually, let's make two. Let's make another one. Okay. So now we should have two users. And I believe the default password is secret. So let's grab this email. Let's go back into our REST client. And let's pass in the information we need to log in. So here you can just click on body and just do multi-part form is fine. And here's where we can pass in the information. So we need to pass in grant type. I believe it's password. And we need to pass in the client ID, which is, where is it? 2. And the secret is this. So let's copy this. Client ID is 2. Client secret is that. And now we can pass in the username and the password. Username was this. And the password is secret. Let's give it the wrong password first and see what the response is. Okay, so we get a 401 unauthorized. It says invalid credentials. Cool. But if we pass in the correct password, hopefully this results in a token. And it does. So you can see the token type is a bearer. This is the expiry date. I think by default it's 1 year. You can change that if you like. And this is the token that we're interested in. So I'm going to copy that. And now whenever we make subsequent requests to this API, we need to pass in this. And this will have information about this specific user. So let me show you what I mean. If we go into our routes, you can see there's this default routes in the API. And it has a middleware of auth API. And it just returns the user info if we pass it the correct token. So let's go ahead and hit that API. So let's make a new one. Let's call it additional requests. It's a GET request. Okay, create. Let's put it in here, sorry. Okay. And let me just grab this. paste it, and it's just /API because everything is behind that API route, and then /user. And this is going to be unauthorized because we're not passing in that token, or this error, I think we have to give it some JSON headers. So accept application JSON. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, so now we get unauthenticated. But if we pass in that token from here, let's copy that again, go back to here. So there's two ways we can do it. We can just pass it in the header here. Actually, there's more than two ways, but I'll show you two ways. Authorization is the name and the value is bearer, and then you paste in the token after a space. And now this should return the user. And it does. There you go. There's the information. You can see if I change this, we'll get unauthenticated because it's the wrong token. But if we pass in the correct one, we get the correct information. So this is the way we're going to do it in our front end. We have to pass in this header. So let me just delete this and show you the other way. So delete should be unauthenticated. Okay. You can also do it through here, which is essentially just adding it in the header, but it's just a nicer way to do it within this client, and then just pass in the token there and same result. Cool. If you look at the information that we're passing in, sorry for this, you'll see that we have these three pieces of information. So for grant type and client ID, that's okay. That can be public, but client secret, as the name implies, should be secret. If we hardcode this into our JavaScript, anyone can see that, and that's not a good thing. So how are we going to keep this a secret? We can keep this a secret by making a custom endpoint on our backend, and then just make a subsequent request to this endpoint, and that should do it. So I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, just come along with me and I'll show you what I mean. So we're going to make a new one here. Actually, let's make a new controller. Let's call it auth controller. Okay. So now we have this auth controller. Actually, let me make the route first. So we're going to make a new route. It's going to be a post request. Let's make the endpoint login. So it's going to be /API/login. As auth controller, we'll call it login. And we don't really need a name, but we'll leave it anyway. Let me just remove the name. We don't need it. Okay, now let's go to that auth controller and let's make that new method. So we call it login. We're going to pass in the request. And here is where we're going to make a request. So we can just use a client for making requests within PHP. And I'm going to use Guzzle. So just bear with me while I set it up. We have to use Composer. So Composer require, I think it's Guzzle HTTP Guzzle. And now I'm just going to paste a whole block of code in here, which just makes the request. So it's a try catch statement. So here's the endpoint. We'll hard code it for now. What's the endpoint? Well, we will hard code it. Is that the right endpoint? To do Laravel.test. It is. Okay. Like I said, we'll hard code it for now, but we'll move it to an environment variable later. Same with these three. We'll move this to environment variable. Actually, these two. This is not going to change. So these and this will move to environment variable. Let's just see if it works. So we'll keep it for now. This is coming in from our request. and then we don't need this. This is just returning whatever we get. And this is just some exception handling that returns certain codes if we get certain errors. So let's try this custom endpoint. So I'm going to duplicate this one. And let's call it login custom. And now the endpoint is API login. We don't need any of these anymore. So let's try out the incorrect case first. So wrong password. Okay. But if we get the right password, we should get that token back again. And we don't. Oh, sorry. I pasted in the wrong client secret. This is the one from my other app. So let's grab that again. Actually, it should be in here. Yeah, so it should be this one. My bad. So put that in here. Okay, so now that should work. There you go. There's it, our token. And if we do the same thing, additional requests, change the token, we should get the same thing. Cool. But now we're no longer having to hard code this information. This is all abstracted to the backend. And now we're using this custom endpoint. Cool. Now we can store this information in an environment variable, which we'll do right now. Okay, so I moved everything over to a config array here. So services passport. So in our services file, I have a new key here for passport. And we have the login endpoint, client ID, and client secret. And all of that is defined here now. And yeah, let's see if it still works. And it does. Cool. Okay, let's quickly make an endpoint for registering new users. So let's duplicate this one. Let's call it register. And it's going to be register here. And we're going to pass in one more piece of information, just a name. Say John. Can you move this up? Okay, let's move it up. Cool. John at example.com. Okay. So back to our code. Let's go back to our routes. Let's make a new one. Let's just duplicate this one. Let's call it register. And let's call it register. Okay, back to our auth controller. And let's make a new one after login. It's right here. Register. Request. Okay, let's just see how there's a register controller that Laravel uses if you actually use the auth scaffolding. So I'm just going to grab some code from here. Okay, so let's do some validation. So I'm going to steal this and change it up just a little bit. Since we're just using a request, we can do something like this. So request validate, then we can do that. And I'm just going to remove this confirmed because I'm just going to make one password field when we register. We're not going to make them repeat it, so let's remove that. And then I'm just going to steal this. And then paste that in. It's just request name. Same with this. Request email. And then let me make sure to import this. I think it's that one. And then request password. Okay, let's see if that works. So let's just pass this through. Method not allowed. What did I do wrong? Okay, so I added this accept JSON, so it now returns JSON as an error, and it's saying the email field is required. So this has to be email instead of username. And now, user not found. Import. Try again. And there we go. Let's check if validation works. And we just saw that it did. So if I don't pass in an email, there you go. And if you check the database, it should be there. There he is. And now let's try logging in. So let's go this. Secret. There we go. There's our token. And for additional requests, we can hit this endpoint where we'll eventually merge our to-do APIs into here. So we have to eventually move these into something that has this auth API middleware. We'll do that in another video. But if I just paste this in, we should get John, our new user. Okay, while we're here, let me just implement the logout functionality. So when we log out, if you look into our database, here's all the tokens that have been issued. When we log out, we want to delete all of these tokens associated with the user that wants to log out. So all of these in our case, or whichever user is logged in. Let's go ahead and do that. More on this later on when I actually log out on the client side. But since I'm in the backend already, I'm going to do it now. So in order to log out, we need to be logged in. So we want this middleware associated with this logout route. So post. We'll clean this up later on, where we can just have a route group for everything that needs that auth API middleware. But for now, I'll just leave it like this. So auth controller logout. Okay, now go into our auth controller and let's make a new one for logout. Logout. We don't need any params. And like I said, we're going to grab the logged in user. So same way we usually do it. So auth user. Let me go into user and show you. So let's go into here. There is a tokens method which gets all the access tokens. And if we look at token, we can either revoke them, which is just going to set this revoke field to 1, and then the user can no longer use that token, or we can just actually delete them. So it's up to you what you want to use. I'm just going to delete them. So auth user tokens. So that's going to return a collection, and I want to go over each one. So I'm going to use the each method on the Laravel collection, which takes in a callback, token, and a key. And then we can just do, again, token, revoke, or delete. I'm going to delete them. And just return response JSON logged out successfully. $200. Okay, so let's just try this in our REST client. So I'm going to copy this. This is John's token. I'm going to make a new one, Let me just duplicate this one over here. Call it logout. Let me just put this underneath. And then we're going to call logout. We don't need any of this. No body actually. And this will be an error because we're not logged in. I should actually catch this, but I'm just going to leave it for now. I just want to make sure it works. So I'm going to pass in that token. And this should delete all of John's tokens. So right now, before I do it, we only have one. So it's this one right here. Let's see if this works. What's my error? I think I forgot a semicolon. I did. Let's try it again without this. That should still be an error. Let me remove this. Add JSON actually. Okay, now we're getting the proper error message. But if I pass in the correct token, there you go, logged out successfully, check our database, and this one should be gone. And it is, cool. Again, more on this later on when we implement login on our client. So there you have it guys, we've managed to set up the backend for token-based authentication. In the next video, we'll take a look at setting up everything in the front end with Vue.js, how to store the token, and how to actually log into our application. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thanks for watching guys. See you in the next one. Okay, thanks, bye.